Hi, welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly Podcast. I'm Javen.
Guff.
Guff, what are we talking about today?
We're gonna talk about. I think we should talk about Frostgrave.
Frostgrave?
I've seen you play it. I've seen you lose a few times now.
3 times.
3 times.
I've
Yeah,
lost
that's what I
3
heard. You
times in a
lost
row.
last night. Was it as one-sided, or are you getting better?
No, it was about as one-sided as it's been.
So your rolls are just not going for you.
Well, the unfortunate thing about Frostgrave when I play it is I make about half my combats.
Right.
I win about half of them, but when I win by like 1 or 2 points.
Right.
And then when my opponent wins, they usually rolling like a nat 20 and just killing my guys in one shot.
Oh, yeah.
That-
I did notice that a few times.
That's the unfortunate part is like every time I lose a combat, I'm basically pulling a guy off the table. Every
Right.
time my opponent's lost a
They just
combat,
right down a hit
they
point
just
loss.
they change lose 1 HP. So
Right.
that's kind of my luck with Frostgrave.
So what is Frostgrave?
Frostgrave is
For those who are listening.
it is a miniature war game.
Yep.
So it is a game that is played on a tabletop 2x2 table, so 2 foot by 2 foot.
That's for one player, right? Or is that for all players?
That's for 2 players.
Right. Okay.
Usually they say that if you add, from my understanding, you want it to be about a foot by foot for each player. Each player should get about a foot by foot.
Right.
So
that's not bad. I seen you guys. You set it up, and
you can play it on a coffee table. Like it
didn't look that bad.
No,
Like
no.
it didn't look like you guys. It was close enough that you guys had action right away, but it was still far enough that if you want to keep, say, your wizard back or your archer back a ways, they weren't immediately into combat with the barbarians.
Yeah. So Frostgrave is, like I said, a miniature war game. And it's called it. They say it's miniature agnostic. What the hell does that mean? What it means is you can use miniatures
Exactly.
from any system.
Gotcha.
So they don't. I mean, they do have miniatures that you can buy. I think North Star Games makes them.
Right.
Don't quote me on that. That are official quote unquote Frostgrave miniatures. But basically anything with a 28 millimeter base, which is most of the like WizKids line or
Right.
Reaper,
Yeah.
or
Reaper.
hell, even Old Metal Ral Partha. I use some of those if you could find them.
Oh, I got some. Actually, this new company making them again.
Making the Ral Partha.
Yeah, I think it's Ironworks. I think is the name of the company.
Okay. So you can use your pewter or lead. I think some are made out of lead, right?
Yeah, almost. Well, no, there's nothing made out of lead anymore. But
Right.
It's all pewter now, which is a tin.
Or an alloy or something like
It's
that.
a tin alloy. It's a tin alloy. Because lead is, poisonous and will kill children, I guess.
Yeah.
They tell me anyway.
Anyway, so Frostgrave, yeah, what you're doing in Frostgrave is it's not quite like Warhammer. It's more along the lines of, this is gonna sound weird, but like Blood Bowl or Necromunda.
Okay.
Or Warcry, I think, maybe. I don't know a whole lot about Warcry.
Right.
But it's a skirmish-based game. So the idea is like you're not putting 100 models on the table and playing a game against somebody, and it's not really a tournament game. It's a campaign game, is what it's
Right.
like. So it's kind of like Gaslands when they did their season of Gaslands,
the
televised
seasons. Yep.
And so the idea behind these sort of games, these skirmish games, and maybe we'll talk a little more about skirmish games after talking about Frostgrave a little bit.
Right.
The idea is you start with an X number of warbands or a certain amount of money that you can spend to buy people for your warband.
Right.
And then so you pick out all the characters you want in your warband, and then you roll a scenario on a table. And then you play that scenario, and then you'll get experience, you'll get gold for your warband if you collect treasure.
Right.
The main objective of the game is to go into the frozen city with your warband, collect treasure, and get out alive. That's the general core loop of gameplay.
So it's not necessarily to kill the other opponent and all of his people.
No, it's not. It
just happens to be that's what's happening to you.
Well, it happens to be that's how we're trying to learn how to play the game. We're trying to,
which is
we're forcing the most complex rule situations that we can, basically.
That makes sense.
To figure it out. But we're probably going to start a campaign here pretty quick, by the sound of it. And
that means we'll have to have some teams then. Is everybody? How many people?
We can have as many people as you want.
So okay. How many people at a time play? Usually 2, 4.
Usually 2.
Okay, so 2 at a time, and then
I think 3 or 4 could be interesting.
Right.
But I think I don't know if I'd play with more than 3 until we all have several games under our belts
Right.
to really like understand the rules.
Yeah.
Just for speed. It's not meant to be a 2-hour process.
Right.
In fact, I think most of the games we've played have been about 15 minutes of setup time and then about an hour of playing,
Right.
plus some for learning.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you got to have the learning part.
But I mean, we played almost an entire game in 50 minutes,
See, there's a whole bunch of
and there's tons of
supplements.
there's tons of expansions for it.
That's interesting.
If you want to get in, the best way to get into Frostgrave is to just go on Osprey Games or Amazon and just pick up the second edition.
Yeah.
And it's like a $30 book, and it has all the
Yeah,
rules
all
you
the
need.
book, all the prices are fair.
And if you have minis laying, or it's not like GW, you're not paying $60 for
No.
half of a rule set for your own for only your army.
Right.
It's you pay 30. It's like Gaslands. You pay $30, you get all the rules you need. That's it. That's all you need to do.
Yeah, that's pretty handy. I like it.
It's great.
I'm looking forward to playing my first match with you guys at some point.
Yeah, skirmish
But
game.
I thought it'd be nice to let you guys learn the rules because I don't mind doing rules. I'm kind of past that point. I just
Yeah,
rather just
have someone
let
teach
younger
you.
people learn it. My brain doesn't work as well as it used to. Actually, look at that. I can buy all the Frostgrave on my distributor.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So
Some of them
I know a lot of local
Oh,
game stores carry it because it is a
That's a solid game.
it's a cheap, solid game. And so back to
Sorry.
a
Yeah.
little more about it. The campaign play is kind of where it's at
Right.
for the extended play. Because if you're only playing an hour-long game, it's nice that you can play it in an evening or not even have to dedicate an evening to it. You can meet up with someone at your local game store if you have an hour or two to kill
Right.
and play a game, and then you're not spending 6 hours playing a game, you know.
Yeah. No. Yeah. When you're playing a game, say like Frostgrave or even Gaslands, and it says in the book, this is supposed to be about a 40 to 60-minute game.
Yeah.
And you play for 2 hours, you're like,
Yeah.
or 3 hours or 4 hours.
That gets to be too much.
Yeah. For me, I don't really want to play in any long. I don't mind playing games that are over periods of time. Like if we play 10 sessions over a period of 4 or 5 weeks, that's cool.
Yeah.
But if we're playing 10 sessions and each session is 4 hours long, I'm probably not interested anymore.
Yeah, well, and that's the difference between these skirmish games.
Like I like this, yeah.
Versus like a D&D session or a game of Warhammer 40,000, where
right.
if you're learning how to play that could be upwards of 5 hours.
Yeah, no, that's kind of why
like that's a
not
whole
been so hardcore into it with you guys, but
the nice thing about Warhammer 40,000 is just it's and D&D, and any game that's longer than a couple hours. Hell, even there's some board games that are long. Catan can take more than a couple hours sometimes.
Right.
Look,
yeah.
Monopoly.
Yeah.
When you were a kid, when you played Monopoly, you only played Monopoly if you had a ton of time.
Well, if you follow the rules.
Yeah.
Which everybody has home rules for Monopoly. I don't know anybody who doesn't. Same thing with Risks and Axis and Allies.
Yeah.
They can all take a long time.
Well, and I'm a big fan of games, and Warhammer does this. Sorry, we keep talking about Warhammer, but it's like the most notable point of reference for most people in the wargaming sphere,
right?
Which is why I talk about it. Legion is another great example. Those games actually have to put on turn limits,
right?
So you can only play so many turns. And once you play a long time and understand the bigger games, the non-skirmish games, most people are pretty gracious and will just you can see how the game's going to end up by turn 3,
right?
By the end of turn 3,
right?
Some of them do go all 5 turns, and it's important to play it out. But most of the time, the writing's on the wall by the end of turn 3,
right?
And most gracious opponents will just call it at the end of turn 3 if they know that they can't win. They'll look at the point spread and be like, okay, well, I can't. I literally just, there's no way I can get enough points to win. And there's nothing wrong with that. Even in skirmish games, there's nothing wrong with, I've done it many times where we haven't finished a game and I'm down to 1 guy in my warband left and my opponent has 7 and I'm like, I'm just going to concede because...
Right. Yeah, it gets to be...
Because quite honestly, there's no way I'm gonna win. And there's nothing wrong with that. But back to Frostgrave.
Yep.
The sculpts are pretty cool. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the game a little bit.
Yeah, let's do that.
So your warband, creation is kind of the first thing they talk about in the book. Well, they talk about wizard creation first.
Yep.
So I guess we'll go over that.
It's pretty important stuff there.
So
he's the
the boss.
foundation of your game.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. He's the boss of your game. So you pick a wizard. And it doesn't cost any money to get a wizard because they're the leader of your warband. You need to have one. The wizard can have tons of different schools of magic. They have everything from evocation, which is like lightning and fireballs and all sorts of crazy stuff, to necromancy, and you can raise zombies. The witch is kind of like a hybrid between a witch and a druid.
Yeah.
They can get like animal companion, and you can start your game with a bear in your party, and like there's all sorts of different cool. There's teleport magic. There's a 100 different. Actually, not 100, but almost 100. I think there's 80 spells in the core book.
That's just in the core book. I was looking at the expansions, and some of them have 122 more add spells. They add all kinds of extra stuff, which is crazy.
Yeah, and like I feel like we haven't even sunk our teeth into the core book.
I know. I know once we've got the core understood and we start doing that, I think I'm gonna buy some of the extra books just to add. Maybe as the campaign goes on.
Well, yeah, and that's the idea too. Is like I think we play one campaign with a core book.
Right. Yeah. Well, you gotta get used to the game.
And the campaigns, they can go as long or as short as you want.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, like that's the nice thing about like the narrative style as well too. There's a lot of I'm gonna call it forced narrative.
Right.
Where the scenarios you roll aren't gonna be like most war games where it's oh, well, there's rain, so we're all at -1 to shoot.
Right.
Or oh, we have extra buildings or something like that. All of the scenarios in the book that I've seen so far have been very unique.
Right.
Some like the one we played last night, all the treasure was inside buildings.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And when you go inside a building with a character, you roll a dice and you could either spawn a ghoul or a wraith.
Joy.
Or nothing.
Okay. I didn't notice that. I didn't see that part.
Yeah. So my wizard last night ended up in a building and had a bunch of ghouls that spawned.
Of course.
Because like 4 people went in the building, and each time I rolled it and had no luck. And then my wizard just got mobbed down the whole game by ghouls.
Of course.
Nice. But
anyway, sorry, yeah, we're going back.
So back to creating your wizard. So what you're aiming to do is you pick a main school of magic for your wizard. So let's say I'm going to be a necromancer. I pick 3 necromancy spells, and there's no modifiers when I want to cast them.
Right.
There's no penalty to casting. Well, now there's a thing called allied schools. So there's going to be a bunch of different schools that have that are adjacent to my school. It's kind of like the old 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons chart for like what schools of magic you can cast if you're a specialist. It definitely goes into that vein of like old school magic casting.
Yeah, that was pretty cool because I think we were talking about what's the opposite of this.
Yeah,
that was kind of cool. I like that.
And they add that into this game, which is really cool. Feels very retro. Like it feels retro when you play it. Because it reminds me a lot of 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons.
That was cool. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's very unique in that aspect. So you make your wizard, you pick your spells. If you pick from adjacent or opposing schools, there's a modifier when you roll a dice to cast a spell.
Okay.
And the core of the game is played on a die 20, which anybody who plays D&D has a 1 die. All you need to play the game is 1 die 20.
Right.
Per dice. There's no specialist dice. And it makes the game very swingy too, which feels pretty appropriate for the setting.
Right.
Because the trouble with like a 6-sided wargaming is that you always have a 16% chance of just an automatic success, right?
Right.
Whereas a die 20, you only have a 5% chance, so it feels a lot swingier. There's a larger array of numbers, but that's mathematical stuff. We'll get into that another time. Maybe we'll talk about statistics in D&D another time.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. That's a whole beast in itself.
Yeah.
Pretty much that's when they started D&D. Everything was tables and statistics.
Yeah.
That's literally all it was.
Yeah. And it does kind of feel a little bit like that in this game because of the die 20. The die 20 is just because it's increments of 5% chances, right? And it just makes for a very dynamic, I'll call it, play style. or
I
narrative.
like it mostly because one, it's familiar. Two, it can swing either way at any moment, as
It,
you have found out.
and it feels appropriate,
Yeah,
like for the game and for the setting and for the minis we're using. It just feels
it just
appropriate.
feels right.
So I have no qualms with the mechanics of the game.
Right.
Um,
Nice.
Further into your warband, after you've chosen a wizard, you get 500 gold pieces to buy members of your warband, and you can buy up to 4 specialist members, which can be everything from like paladins to barbarians to rangers to kind of your named classes
Right.
in D&D is basically what the equivalents are in the table. There's also some non-specialists like apothecaries, which you think would be a specialist, but I'm not going to get into that.
Right.
Man-at-arms, infantrymen, and then
Apothecary.
yeah, apothecaries. Yeah,
What does he you bring him along and he makes potions for you?
yeah, actually, yeah.
Oh, okay.
You
That's
start you
pretty
start the
cool.
game with a healing potion
Okay.
with the apothecary, and so there's also an equipment list that you can buy and give stuff to your dudes,
Right.
and there's always the option to take free warband members as well.
Right.
And the free members are basically the worst members in the game. Like they have the worst statistics in the game,
Right.
but they're free, and they come with a dagger or a hand weapon. You get thugs and thieves. Thugs fight a little bit better in combat, but thieves move a little faster.
Right.
So it's kind of a trade-off. And your thugs and thieves are kind of your bread and butter. Those are the guys who want to go into dangerous situations and maybe grab the treasure in the center of the map. Because you don't want your expensive guys to do that, because if you lose them in the next game, now you don't have them.
Yeah, that was I was gonna ask that is if you lose a guy in a game, I mean, is he just dead? Is dead?
So we haven't played a campaign yet,
Right.
so we have to get into the campaign rules. But from my understanding, um, yeah, more or less,
Dead is just dead.
they're either injured and they get a permanent injury,
Right.
which can be like they lose an eye or something like that, and they're less effective, or it could just be they're outright killed.
Oh.
So there's a table that you roll on,
Right. Okay.
as any good.
Oh yeah, so like his in Blood Bowl.
Yeah, just like in Blood Bowl, just
all
like
the
in
other games,
Necromunda and
right.
all those other games.
Oh, even Gaslands had
And
something like
Gasland,
that,
yeah, there's a table that you roll on to see if your guy is dead, basically. The other thing I should note is there's also the option for 100 gold to buy an apprentice. And an apprentice is a worse wizard, more or less.
Okay.
They have lesser stats, and then they have a -2 to all their casting rolls.
Right.
So it's harder for them to cast spells. Because they're not as practiced as the wizard.
Right.
And they use the same spell list as your wizard, because your wizard can only teach the spells to the apprentice that the wizard knows. Very, very, very fluffy lore accurate,
Right.
you know.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a really cool game. What else? I guess we could talk about mechanics a little bit.
Sure.
So the game's broken down into phases.
Okay.
There's a wizard phase where you activate your wizard, and you can activate up to 3 characters on your warband
Okay.
that are within line of sight and 3 inches of the wizard. And the idea is that like you're shouting orders to them and
Right.
kind of directing.
So there
them.
is some incentive to keeping your guys in your
There is, yeah, there is. There's an apprentice phase, which is the exact same as the wizard phase. You can activate up to 3 guys
Okay.
in addition to your apprentice.
Okay. So you get your apprentice, then he can activate different guys than your wizard.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
you cannot activate the same person twice in a round
Okay.
in any phase.
Fair enough.
And then there's a soldier phase, they call it, which is anybody who's not being directed by a wizard or an apprentice, someone who's not being led, more or less.
Right.
And then there, what's
Bless you.
sorry. And then there is a soldier phase. That's anybody who isn't being led. You activate all of them.
So that's okay. So, wow. So your wizard activates people. They get different abilities than if they're by themselves.
No,
Okay.
they all have the same abilities, but you can cast spells on your people to make them stronger or faster or whatever. And then there's some niche things of like group activations, but that's once you pick up the game, you can get into that. It's
Right.
not.
How many spells around can you cast?
So you can cast basically 1 spell around with
Okay.
each of your wizard and apprentice.
Okay, so
So
two spells around.
every model on the table gets 2 activations.
Okay.
One of those activations has to be a movement activation.
Okay.
There are some niche cases where you get around it, but
Right.
The rule of thumb is that yes, you need to
One
move
movement and then
one movement,
whatever
and then you can take it in either order. You don't have to move and then
Right.
cast a spell.
Okay.
And then there's the creature phase at the very end, and that's any model that is not controlled by a player activates. So in some of these scenarios, like when we talked about where ghouls appear and not whites, wraiths appear,
Yeah.
They will activate in the creature phase, and then your opponent rolls for them if they're trying to fight you or whatever.
Right.
And they have a pseudo AI, if you will, where they just move towards the closest person if they're not in combat. If you start in combat, you fight. Otherwise, you move towards the closest person. That's it. That's all. That's basically all there is to it.
Seemed fairly simple.
The game is extraordinarily simple. It took us maybe 20 minutes to get the core rules down.
Right.
And then all the niche rules
the
after
first thing
that.
You guys played, it just kind of just did it and just went along.
There's some very good battle reports on YouTube of people who have played Frostgrave. There's tons of resources out there for people who are teaching Frostgrave. Basically, you can learn to play in an evening.
Right.
And basically know all the rules. And then I do recommend printing like reference guides. And then archery is a little bit different. And then one thing I do want to talk about in skirmish games, this has kind of always been true. It's not like in the grand battle games of like Star Wars Legion,
right,
or Warhammer 40,000 or Age of Sigmar, where the terrain isn't that dense. The more dense the terrain, usually the more fun.
Right.
To a certain point in these games.
Right.
Because the idea is that Frostgrave is a city, so you shouldn't be able to see anybody.
Frozen city. Yeah,
a frozen city.
Frostgrave, you know.
And so the idea is that there's buildings everywhere, and terrain is pretty important for this. But you can cut out cardboard boxes or
right.
I know Black Magic Craft on YouTube had a whole series where he made Frostgrave terrain out of basically garbage laying around.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you're crafty, you can do that. That's pretty cool. It's good. They're good watches too.
A little bit of XPS foam and a hot glue gun
goes along
and some acrylic paint, and you're basically good to go.
Yeah, I've even seen people just take like their printers and print out like brick walls and glue them onto cardboard and just
or like how you've done with the plaster casting. Like we could do that. Like there's a million ways to make your own terrain.
Right.
And they kind of I don't know if I've seen any terrain really for sale for it, as far as like official terrain.
Right.
So I think they kind of encourage it's like Gaslands. They kind of encourage you to.
I was just looking. There's big companies that make official Frostgrave. But
yeah,
I mean, is it really official? It just probably follows within their guidelines.
It's just their scale. Or if you have any like D&D buildings laying around, or any of your Dungeons and Dragons Pathfinder minis would work great.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with using that. And then trying to think of what else. I would look through, if you're gonna do a campaign, I would look through and read through all the campaign missions, because there's going to be certain minis or certain buildings that you might want.
Right.
Like I know there's one where Frost Giant attacks, so you're going to want a Frost Giant mini. And then try to put everything on bases if you can.
Right.
You can buy cheap MDF cutout bases on Amazon for nothing, or find them at your local game store or whatever. There's tons of different options. Or the WizKids minis all come with bases that are more or less appropriately sized.
That's cool.
Yeah,
it is pretty cool. I enjoyed, even when I was just sitting here watching you guys play. That looks really fun, and I know that the person you were playing with was having a lot of fun, because they specifically said they were having a lot of fun.
So
they really enjoy the game, and they enjoy which I didn't expect, because I've known my daughter for a lot of years.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I was shocked that she was just really into a mini war game. She liked Gaslands though.
I mean,
but this is a little different. This is a little more chaotic. I think.
Well, and the measuring's different. And,
I think she was really.
I mean, to be fair, everybody that I've ever played a mini war game with, has liked it.
Yeah, that's.
It's usually most of these mini war games have a barrier to entry, and that's why I highly recommend looking at these skirmish games, because the skirmish games, even the most expensive skirmish games, which we've been talking about them a lot lately, but I'll throw it out there. GW has some pretty expensive miniature games, but if you think about it, the cost of buying a Warhammer army, a full army, versus buying one box of minis for your warband
Right.
for Necromunda or Kill Team or whatever, or Blood Bowl.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily cheaper and less cost prohibitive than
Right.
buying a whole army.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
if you ever want to dip your toes into the hobby of mini wargaming, I highly recommend games like Frostgrave
Yeah, no, it's
or Gaslands. They're both just amazing games. They're very fun. They're very quick, easy to learn,
Yep.
simple rules. There hasn't
And
been like any discrepancy in like, oh, how does this work? We've been able to find just about everything.
right, and I think the best part I like about them is they're games that anybody can play. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to have a degree in,
Statistics.
statistics
Yeah.
to play these games. You don't have to, you don't have to be super creative and super hobbyist because you can literally just buy minis off the shelf or pull stuff out of here. I mean, technically, I even thought about how would you do it futuristically, like with Legos and stuff, or using little Lego figures.
Oh, yeah,
as long
you
as
can
you had the proper bases,
Yeah.
because that's
And-
a lot of it's off
And
bases.
the game even states too that like if a mini is not on a base, just go with your best judgment.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
It's really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile game to pick up if you're interested in dipping your toes into the wargaming
Right.
hobby.
Cool.
So yeah, it's called Frostgrave.
Frostgrave. Yep.
It is published by Osprey Games.
Yep.
That is OSPREY.
Yep.
I think James A. McCullough wrote it.
Yep.
And yeah, Frostgrave, check it out. It's a really fun time.
Excellent. Hey, before we leave though, if you made it this far, now know that you can hear all of our stuff on YouTube.
That's right. All of our stuff is now on YouTube.
I will have it slowly being added. I'll probably add an episode a day for the next 2 months because that's about how long it's going to take.
Okay.
I don't want to just overwhelm everybody and just like nobody's going to listen to anything if you overwhelm them.
Do you want to start with the most recent stuff and work?
Yeah,
backwards?
yeah, I'm going to
Okay.
work backwards. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll start with the most recent stuff and I'll just work backwards. So
Yeah, keep your eyes
But-
peeled for that. Feel free to link us to your friends if you like what we do. And
yeah, we're gonna get a little more into that. I think we mentioned that at the beginning of the year review.
Yep, that was in the beginning of the year. Yeah.
So I finally got that taken care of, and also working on the Discord stuff. So soon that'll all be ready to go, and everybody can interact however they want.
Yeah, we're hoping.
So-
We hope that you guys enjoy it, and we'd love to hear from you. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm excited for with YouTube is the feedback.
Yeah, I got a lot more followers on YouTube than I do on lots of
Yeah.
other platforms. So
All right. Well, until next time.
yeah, catch you later.
Thanks for listening.